I've been in the dark all my life, so this don't bother me. Thank you, Ruth. I never could remember names till I took that Dale Carmichael course. That recitation of the first part of chapter 5 is beautiful, and the first time I ever heard that done was from a man from this area, John Slayback, that's gone on to the big meeting. I've heard others do it, but John was the first. Welcome to the League of Nations Thursday night bingo deal. From the people from various states, it must be a League of Nations. I want to congratulate you on your Christmas party, your anniversary, and Bill's anniversary. Any time that we can get people together in AA, it's always great. I'm glad that many of you brought your wives. Of course, bringing your wives with you is kind of like taking the game warden with you when you go hunting, but I guess it's all right. I'm an alcoholic, and my name is Franklin Williams. All right. By the grace of God, to fellowship with men and women like you, and because this program does wait, it hadn't been necessary for me to take a drink today, and for this I am most grateful. I am what the big book refers to as a real alcoholic, and I won't go into that, but I think many of you know the difference between a real alcoholic and maybe some people that come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think a lot of people come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and don't recognize that you're supposed to stop drinking. And I think there are a lot of people in AA that don't understand that you're supposed to stop drinking. I had a hard time catching on to that not drinking business. And I think we ought to stress that more with new people, that you're not supposed to drink. I like to talk about sponsorship. I won't have time tonight, but Daly knew the first man that made the call on me. I can call his name, Marion Hill. And, in fact, I had 3 sponsors to begin with. I didn't pick sponsors. They drew straws, and 3 of them lost. And they sublet me. And the only one that stuck was a little fellow named David Gates that's also gone on to the big meeting, and I'll have to bring in David's name along. And I like to talk about sponsorship because, first, to let you know that I did have and still do have sponsors, and tough sponsors. And I think if there's a weak link in the chain of Alcoholics Anonymous in my area, it's in sponsorship. But I won't have time to get off and preach on that as badly as I'd like to. I'm an arrested alcoholic. In fact, I've been arrested many times. I hear people get up behind these church-like fixtures and say that they've been in jail 100 times, 95 times, 137 times. I don't know how many times I've been in jail. I wish I'd kept up with it. But I didn't know it was going to be a thing of social prestige. When I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am a member in good standing of the Quonset group in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I came in. I attend it every Monday night that I'm in town. I'm there most Monday nights. We only meet once a week. We go for quality. Then we visit other groups. I was taught you're only a member of one group. Now, I also attend on a regular basis the Olive Branch group at Olive Branch, Mississippi. In both groups, we are studying the Big Book. I was taught that the Big Book is a textbook. And I was taught that the only instructions and the only directions that was necessary for me as an alcoholic to find a way to live comfortably with myself and with you and the God of my understanding would come within the 164 pages of the Big Book. So I am a Big Book nut. So we are studying the Big Book, trying to learn what the directions are and trying to find a way to follow these directions. I hear so much garbage around some groups now that it don't even resemble what I understand about Alcoholics Anonymous. So we are having new people to come in that don't hear all of this stuff. And all they know is the directions in the big book. And they're staying sober. And they're bringing their book to the meeting. And I think that's terrific. During my active alcoholism, I had to have something to take care of right now, right this minute. I knew what the end result was going to be of me taking a drink. But I also knew what it would do for right now. And it wasn't until I came to you people, to a bunch of failures in every department of your life, that you taught me, you showed me, and taught me how to take care of right now. And I can do this by applying the 12 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to my daily life. So this is the only thing that I have ever found that would take care of right now. And really, that's all I have, and that's really all any of us have. I couldn't read anything in the big book when I first came in and comprehended. I couldn't retain anything. And little old David Gates, the sponsor that stuck by me, finally gave me a big book. He told me I was unemployable and unemployed, and I was living off of friends and living around eating around the club rooms. And he kept telling me that you must do this and you must do that. And I said, David, Robbie says I don't have to do any of this must business. And he said, well, let me tell you, said the word must appears 74 times in the big book. But you must do this. You must get you a big book and read it. I said, David, you know I can't get a big book. He says, you know how to steal. Says, you go out and steal your big book. And we got a step in this program. By the time you get on to it, you can make amends for it. He finally gave me a big book and told me to take it home and just read the black part of it. And he explained why. I didn't know what the physical allergy is. I didn't know what the mental obsession was. I just didn't know anything. And I read to David for 5 years out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, before I found out he could read. He knew where everything was in that big book, and he'd point to it and have me to read and explain it to him. And I did this, as I say, for 5 years. And I still didn't learn very much. But David stayed sober. And, of course, after 9 months in this program, well, I stayed sober by the grace of God, and strictly by the grace of God. He used to take me to a meeting every night, and I don't recommend this with a new person for too long a period of time because you get dependent on you. And that's what David told me. I said, I didn't have any wheels. He said, we find walking helps. So he'd take me to a meeting every night. And he took me to a meeting one night, first time I'd been to a closed meeting away from my own group. And I said, are you going to talk tonight? He said, no. I said, they're going to call on everybody. They're going to call on me? He said, yeah. But let me give you some directions before you get up there. David believed in getting on your feet. He believed in action. He said, when they call on you, you get up and say that you're an alcoholic and your name's Franklin Williams and you're a member of the Quonset group, and sit your butt down. Said, you done told them people all you know. So profundity never did get me sober. There's little simple things that people said to me that struck home to me. And that's why one of the reasons I think it's necessary to have a sponsor that'll explain these steps to you and walk with you and do these steps with you and show you how to go down this road. I didn't know what I said is mental obsession was. And he turned to the book and had me to read that I was possessed of an idea that someday, some way, I was going to find a way to defeat this thing. And he said for me to get things in terms I could understand. And so I told him about when I was in college, and I like to tell you about going to college to let you know I'm educated. But my wife said I'm educated educated way beyond my intelligence. So I thought about when I was in school, we were going out freshman football and had a big old boy from Sullivan's Hollow. You don't know where that is, but it's a tough section of Mississippi, named Red McGinnis. And I smarted off to Red McGinnis one day in the grill, and he knocked me down, and every time I'd start to get up, Red knocked me back down. And I never laid a hand on Red McGinnis. Now, that was 50 years ago. And there ain't no way in the world tonight that I'd say anything smart to Red McGinnis if he'd show up. I completely and unconditionally surrendered to Red McGinnis. But you know, it wasn't that way with alcohol. It knocked me down, and I'd get up time and time again. Say, you ain't going to do it next time. I'm going to switch over here to vodka. I'm going to switch to this, and I'm going to switch to that. And this is beneficial to me today, because at times today even I take my life and try to manage it. And I talk a lot to myself, because David told me to talk to myself. He said, little Franklin is the one that's causing you trouble. And said, you talk to him. And said, you call him by names that he can understand. And I'd said, Franklin, you little SB, said, what you got to do is get on your knees and have a Red McGinnis surrender to God. And I do this. So that's still beneficial to me. So really the text of my sermon tonight is to keep it simple and follow directions. And that's part of keeping it simple. If I had to use 6 words to sum up this program, I could do it with these, or I do it with these as a matter of simplicity. Trust God, clean house, and help others. Now, in the group I was brought up in, we didn't have anything except conference-approved literature. We didn't have the 24-hour book at that time. We didn't have anything except conference-approved literature. And I was taught to read this. And I was taught every morning to read something out of the big book. And then any time that I was in this little garage apartment that I was staying in as a graduate, to read something in that big book. So I started out doing this. And using these 6 words each morning when I get up, it reminds me of who I am and what I'm trying to be. So this matter of simplicity is really important to me. I don't talk much about drinking anymore, because I drank from the time I was 16 till I was 45, 29 years. And I gave it everything I had. And I never did learn a way to drink successfully. So, but I have, one day at a time, found a way in this program to live what I consider successful to me. At least I'm comfortable with me and with you and the God of my understanding. And if there's anything else to life, I don't know what it is. So this is what I use. As I say, I started drinking when I was 16, and I drank till I was 45. I'll only mention the last drunk I got on, because it's the drunk that brought me to AA. Now, this drunk wasn't as bad as many drunks that I had pulled. I didn't suffer as much physically. I didn't suffer as much mentally. But evidently, I was ready to throw in the towel. I had attempted suicide. I say attempted. All I was trying to do is get attention. But I'd done this several times. But at this particular time, I really meant it. I was going to take my life. And I'd stolen a piece of plastic hose and hooked it up to a borrowed car that I had, because I'd been out of wheels for a long time. And stealing was a way of life with me, just like drinking was. And while I was sitting there in that car, thinking about going on to wherever I was going, well, a real peculiar thing happened. I got thirsty. And I got to thinking about that little spot of wine that I had back in my little garage apartment. And what a shame to leave this cruel world and to leave that drink behind. So I went in there and polished off that last wine. And another peculiar thing happened. I passed out. Now, before I went out to the car to finish it all, I had written a suicide note. And David had given me a long yellow legal pad to write my inventory on, because I had been around AA for 9 months at that time. And I had I thought I'd conned him into believing that I had taken the first 3 steps. He knew that I hadn't, but I thought that he thought I did. So he said, if you take an easy, you're ready for the fourth step, and I want to see what kind of fourth step you can take at this time. So I wrote that suicide note, and I don't know about you when you were drinking, but I just loved to cry when I was drinking. I could cry up gallons, and I had this lady had a Al Jolson record, Sonny Boy, in that apartment. Had an old Victrola you wound up, and I'd wind that thing up and cry just gallons. And just before the record had finished, well, the thing had run down. I'd have to slow my crying down to the same pace that the music was. And this old Nashville music, that was the best crying stuff So I wrote and I cried, and I wrote and I cried. And tears had dropped down on the bottom of this pad, and the pen wouldn't write no more. So I put an arrow up to the top, see next page. I said, you can have everything, I'm going on. I had it all. I had it all on. What I hadn't hocked. I had 2 suits, a suit of khakis and a suit of underwear, and the holes matched. So I passed out, and somewhere around 1 or 1:30 of the morning of October the 15th, 1956, I waked up. Now, I didn't come to. We know the difference between waking up and coming to. And I waked up with as clear a mind as I think I have ever had, up till then and even up to now. And even though I'd been around you for 9 months with a closed mind, I knew where the answer was, and I knew where the fault was. And I fell to my knees and I said a honest and sincere prayer. Probably the first one I had ever said in my adult life. And I don't know what I said nor how long I stayed there, but I know I stayed there long enough to make a contract and to make a decision. I admitted that I absolutely no way in the world could handle alcohol. There wasn't any way that I could drink it and not get drunk and not get into trouble. And there wasn't any way that I could keep from drinking. And I realized that I had left undone the things I had intended to do, and I had done the things I had not intended to do. Therefore, my life was unmanageable. And an unmanageable life is just that simple to me. Now, if my life was unmanageable, I needed a manager. And I remembered that you told me in steps 2 and 3 about a manager. Now, if my life was unmanageable and I needed a manager, it made sense that I turned my life and will over to him. And I remembered that's what you told me to do in step 3. So I think I did these 3 things that early morning of October the 15th, 1956. Now, I knew that the God that I did not understand, that I'd heard David and others talk about, wasn't going to move into my house and live with me until I first cleaned it up. And I remembered that that's what you told me to do from steps 4 through 10. But let me back up. When I waked up that next morning around 6 or 6:30, and this is not like a wino like me, to wake up with a clear head. Now, I went to the kitchen of where this lady that owned the garage apartment, they asked if I might call David. And I called him, and he was there in a matter of minutes. I thought it was hours. But he was there in a matter of minutes, and he sat down on that old bed at the end of it and began to tell me things about David. I'm sure he'd told me many of these before, but I hadn't heard them. But most importantly, I told David things about old Franklin I had never told another human being. And he said, son, they're going to get some of your time. Now, when he said they, well, he wasn't talking about Al-Anon. He was talking about the men in blue down at the local Bastille. And 2 days later, they picked me up. So he told me what to do. He says, you don't understand God. You claim you're an agnostic. But says, you get on your knees and you tell God the truth. You tell him that you don't know him. But you know a lot of people that seem to know a lot about him. And they've done some things that have straightened out their lives. And that you, if you're willing to do these things, tell him you're willing to do them, and to give you the strength and the courage to do it. So I began to do this. And they picked me up and took me to the jail, and in time they took me to the county farm. And I stayed out there a required length of time, the time that they sentenced me for. And while there, I realized that I had to have Alcoholics Anonymous. And I asked the warden if we might start a group there. He said we could. I asked if I might call David, and he knew David, and he allowed me to. So David and others came out, and we started the group, and that group is still there. And I'm privileged to go out there now. And I'm also privileged to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous with a number of those boys. So I just hope that God has used me as a channel for His love to flow through me to some of these fellows. I tried to sober up the warden, and the warden didn't even have a drinking problem. In fact, everybody that came out there, I'd meet them and I'd start talking AA to them. But that was good for me because it kept me busy. And in time, I got out. When I got out, there wasn't any way for me to get a job because the type of work I'd been doing, I had to be bonded, and I couldn't be bonded. So I went a long time without working. And I went a long time living as gratis of friends and eating around AA club rooms. So I say this to any new person that thinks they've lost everything. You don't have to have these things in order to get sober. I know I told David, I said, David, if I had a wife, and if I had a good set of wheels, and if I had a nice bunch of threads like you people, I too could stay sober. He said, turn to page 98. And he pointed his finger there and said, read this. And it says, wife or no wife, job or no job, our sobriety does not depend on others. And then he went on 2 or 3 lines and said, finish reading that. But it depends on our willingness to clean house and trust God. And he said, look over on page 99. He pointed his finger there, said, read that. I read it. And he said, turn the page now to page 100 and read that. I read it. He said, what did it say? I said, it says the same thing, David. He said, I know it does. It says, Bill figured some cat like you is going to come along, and you'd miss it on page 98. And he just put on 99 and 100 where you'd be sure and get it. And it might be easier for you to remember pages 98, 99, and 100 than just to remember one number. So that's the type of sponsor I had. As I say, profundity didn't get me sober. Now, I think I can back that up in the big book. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to say a good many things tonight that may be my opinion, but don't you pay any attention to them. But I'm going to also say a good many things that the book says. And you check me out in that and see if the big book says this. So, the big book says that the spirit of AA will get us sober. The principles of AA will keep us sober. The enthusiasm, the love, the look in people's eyes, the smile on their face. I think I can really use one word to define or to sum up this first part of it, and that is LOVE. The people of the Quonset group love this old drunk sober. Now, the principles or the 12 steps of this program, after I got to work on it, has shown me a way one day at a time whereby I don't have to drink and I can somewhat live comfortably. So I went on with the rest of the program, I thought, to the best of my ability. And I went along for a period of between 9 and 10 years of not drinking. I began to get a lot of self-pity, a lot of resentments, a lot of intolerance, a lot of patience. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, maybe there's somebody in here that's been around this program a number of years, and you're not drinking, but you're uncomfortable. All I can do is share with you what happened to me. And it might help you to get back into the big book and to get back into these steps and apply these steps to your life, following the directions that are in the big book. I'll mention that later. So I went to David. Yeah, I'd take somebody to a meeting and the wrong person to talk, and nobody had asked me to talk in a long time. And I was really feeling sorry for poor little old Franklin. And finally I went to David, and I said, David, something's bugging me, and I've got to talk to you. And he says, thank God you came. He said, I've been trying to approach you on this for some length of time, but you had a shell built up there, and I couldn't get through it. You'd evade the question every time. And said, I've been praying that you'd come to me or to somebody before you got drunk. And said, let's go out on the lake Saturday. So we did go out on the lake. He said, there's no place to start except the beginning. So he had me to explain what I thought about the first step and whether I could accept it or not. And it's practically the same as I told you a while ago. He said, in the beginning, you couldn't accept God, call the higher power God. You used the power that's in the concert group as your God. I said, I sure did. He said, is that still true? I said, no. I can comfortably and not be ashamed to call it God today. He said, well, it's not in the first two steps. He said, now let's get into the book on the third step. Well, you know, after being around AA for this length of time and reading it as much as I had read it and working with as many new people as I had worked with, I didn't know that there was a prayer in the third step. And he said, let's get on our knees. He believed in getting on your feet and getting on your knees. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties so that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of thy love, thy service, and thy, and thy way of life. May I always do thy will. And I looked down. I was bigger than David. I looked down, and David was looking up at me, and tears was running down his eyes, his cheeks. Tears were running down my cheeks. And I embraced David the first time in my life I'd ever embraced a man and told him I loved him. And David told me he loved me. This is a beautiful thing, the love that's in this fellowship. So then we read on, and David said the most important thing in this step is making the decision. Said everything about the third step is a variable except making the decision. Made a decision, turn our life and will over to the care of God as we understand it. Said you don't even know what your life and will is at this time. And I didn't. I have found out that my life is my actions and my will is my thinking. To turn my life and my thinking over to the care. Now, I never had seen that care of God. To the care of God as I understand it. And said, your understanding of God is not today what it's going to be 6 months from now. And that's true. See, I don't really understand, well, take my wife Eloise. I don't understand Eloise. Eloise is as I understand her today. But I may have a different understanding of it tomorrow. And hopefully in this program, if I progress the way I want to progress in this thing, I'll have a different understanding of God. He said, now we are ready for the fourth step, and said, let's get into the book on it. Says, I remember that I gave you that yellow pad and told you to write your inventory, and you wrote part of it and showed it to me. And I told you was a damn lie and said you never did show me any more of it. And you took the fifth step with a professional man, and I know why you did it. Because you could lie to him and you couldn't lie to me. He says, do you know why you're supposed to take the fourth step? I said, I know why the book says you're supposed to take it. He said, there's a more important reason than that. He said, you need to take the fourth step so you can take the fifth step. He said, there ain't no way to take the fifth step unless you've taken the fourth step. And said, turn to page 72. And he had me to turn to page 72 and read that those who do not take this vital step do not relieve their alcoholism. And at the top of page 73, invariably they drink again. They haven't learned enough of honesty and humility and thoroughness by telling it all to another human being. And the word all was in italics. And David said anytime something's in italics, it's important. He said, now let's go back to the fourth step. He said, I want you to go over there and get in the car and read this part of the fourth step and see what 3 areas of your life that you need to examine. So I did, and I came back, and I couldn't find it, and I had to get David to help me. And he said the areas of your life that you need to examine are your resentments, your fears, and your sex relations. And says when you get home, you get your legal pad, and at the top of 3 pages, put those 3 headings. And it's going to take more than 1 page for some of them. But have those 3 headings at the top of each page. And then he had me to read the format over on page 65 on the right-hand side. I resent Mr. Brown. Why? Because of his attentions to my wife. How does this affect me? It affects my sex relations. It affects my self-esteem and such as that. Now he says, the paragraph right before here, Bill put in there self-esteem and all these things as the things that are affected. But said he wrote the 12 and 12 some years later and said, I think it'll be simpler for you if we turn to the 12 and 12 in step 4 on the first page of the explanation and read what the 3 God-given instincts are. So I read these and told them to David. An instinct for sex, an instinct for emotional and material security, and an instinct for companionship. And he had me to read that these are God-given instincts and there's nothing wrong with them. That where we get into trouble, or where I would get into trouble, or he would get into trouble, was when one of these basic instincts was interfered with or threatened. He says, now go back to your format. And over there, how did it affect you? It affected 1 or more of your basic instincts. And that's one of the most valuable pieces of information that I have found in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can trace every problem, every bit of trouble that I've gotten into by 1 or more of my basic instincts being threatened, as is brought out in the 12 and 12. Then he had me to turn over a little further in the 12 and 12 in the 4th step and to read the 7 cardinal sins. And he said pride is the first. And I read in there that it's no mistake that pride heads the list. Then he had me to read a little bit farther down that any time the satisfaction of my basic instincts becomes my prime purpose in life, then I'm in trouble. And you roll that around a while. When my real purpose is to satisfy my basic instincts. See, pride steps in and tells me, yeah, you are justified in having this. Then when I don't get it, fear steps in. Then he had me to turn back to the big book and read what fear is. Fear is the thing that takes over when self-reliance fails us. Now he says, go back to the format on 65 and say your sex relations was interfered with, or your emotional security was interfered with, or your material security, or your sex relations, or whatever it was. Then figure out what basic instinct was affected. And if you look on page 65 in parenthesis, opposite each one of these, 1 little old basic instinct in every case, fear, F-E-A-R. So I have found out from my 4th step that my real problem is fear. The end result of my problem is fear. And the only antidote for fear is faith. And it reassures that any solution that I find to my problem of living and drinking must be a spiritual relief, because it's the only thing that will take care of fear. Now, I said it says in there that any time your purpose in life prime purpose in life is to satisfy a basic instinct, then you're in trouble. I have another way of putting it, and to me it gets it across to me better. The motivating force that caused me to do everything that I've ever done, in AA or outside of AA, to get me in trouble, was a basic desire to satisfy a human ego. Now you think about that a while. There's no way in the world to satisfy a human ego, especially an alcoholic. Who among us that's alcoholics ever had enough of anything? Ain't no way. And there ain't no way for any human being. This old boy up home was going fishing. He had to be a drunk. It was late in the season. He went by this minnow place. He didn't know it, but the man was overstocked with minnows. They were so crowded they were dying. So the boy asked him, says, "How much are your minnows?" And the fellow said, "All you want for $1." And the drunk said, "Give me $3 worth." Ain't no way to satisfy a human ego. So then I went back with David after I wrote my fourth step. And we spent a whole day. Now I hear people say they go and take a fifth step in 30 minutes. I don't know how they do it, but that's their problem. It took us a whole day. And we went into this thing at a gut level. And David took his fifth step with me. At least he took that part of his fifth step which would relate to the things that I had done. And then when we finished, we went back to that same log and sat down, and he had me to read from the big book. Now go home and get in a quiet place some more praying. I didn't know it was in there. And thank God from the bottom of your heart that you know him better. Now, David told me any time I prayed to get on my knees. He said the real alcoholics in the beginning, in that step where it said, humbly ask God to remove your shortcomings, Bill will remember it had in there on your knees. And David said, I'm not supposed to tell you you're an alcoholic, and I'm not going to tell you you're an alcoholic, but you're a real damn alcoholic. And when you go home, you get on your knees and you do that. And I did. And it also said to reread the first 5 steps and see if you've left out anything. And if you have, well, do it. Well, evidently I didn't think I'd left out anything. So David said, and that comes out of the big book, says, now you are ready for steps 6 and 7. And the only thing that David told me and the book told me about step 6 is that if I wasn't ready to pray for the willingness. To pray for the willingness. Yeah, I don't think God is going to just wholesale take something away unless I'm willing to do something. Now, this may be controversial with you, but I'll give you the right to be wrong. I don't think that my obsession to drink has been removed. I don't think it's been removed. I think it's been replaced. I think I have an obsession today, an idea that overpowers any other idea, that I want to stay sober more than I want to drink. And I have this obsession today to stay sober, rather than the obsession to try to find a way to drink successfully. Now, the book don't say this, but I think this is what's happened with me. I don't think God removed my character defects. I think he gave me the willingness and the strength and the power to do the things that the program told me to do. They were replaced. My fear has been replaced with faith. My selfishness, my self-pity has been replaced with gratitude, and so on down the line. So I think as long as the pendulum is swinging on the right side with the positive things, these other things don't crop up. But you let me quit practicing gratitude, and you see where self-pity will come back. and these things come back. If he has removed them, it don't say how long. Anyway, I know mine come back. So maybe they're removed for a day, maybe they're removed for 15 minutes. But whatever it is, I know today what to do. So I prayed for the willingness. And I didn't know that there was a prayer in step 7. And David pointed this out to me. And he had me to read it, and then he had me to say it. And I said something like this: God, I am now ready that you take all of me. Take away every single defect of character which stands in my way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. May I always do your bidding. Then David told me I was ready for steps 8 and 9. Page 76 in the big book explains 4 steps on it. That's the only page in the big book that explains that many steps. It said, you're ready for 8 and 9. And he had me to read that I made the list of the people I'd harmed in step 4. And all I could do there was to pray for willingness to make these amends. And then when I got the willingness to do it, to go out and do it. And I can honestly say that I've made amends to everyone except when they injure them or others that has come into my conscious mind. Then he had me to read the promises on pages 83 and 84. And he said, if any of these things materialize in your life. And I could honestly say that I'd had a portion of all of them to materialize. And certainly the last promise that suddenly I realized that God is doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. Then he told me, said, there are a lot more promises in this book. Besides these 12 that are here, there are 49 promises in the explanation of the steps in the big book. And said these 2 will materialize if you wait for them, just like the book says. But if you get to examining those, of the 49 promises, there's not a single promise after a thinking step. After a thinking step. All 49 promises come after the 8 action steps. Now, what does that tell me? That tells me that this is a program of action. If this had been a program of thinking, well, Bill would have put chapter 5 in there into thinking. And wouldn't we been in one hell of a shape if over 1 million alcoholics would get to thinking? That's the worst thing in the world that especially a new alcoholic could do. David told me, he says, your best thinking got you to this program. Said, you're not supposed to think for a year. And said, at the end of a year, if you can think, we'll tell you that you can think. And said, if you go home tonight and think you got to go to the bathroom, you call me first. I said, why, David? He said, you may not need to go. I said, you mean to say that you don't think I got sense enough to know when I need to go to the bathroom? He said, we'll see. So they come out to action steps. Step 10, continue to take a personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admit it. Sometime promptly with me is 10 days or 2 weeks. But if I get to hating enough, I'm going to get in there and do something about it. I liken the 10th step to operating an automobile. Now, this is not in the book, but it's a matter of simplicity to me. That's the way I see it. I've heard some people say, work the first 9 steps and forget about them. And then the last 3 will keep you sober. Well, that may for some people, but the book don't say that. The book says the only step I can take is its entirety, and one place it says is in the explanation of step 6 in the 12 and 12. It may say it somewhere else in there. But the only step I can take in its entirety is the first step. So I've got to go back and take these. Now, incidentally, I've taken several 4th and 5th steps and on through the program since that time, when I was sober between 9 and 10 years. And this is what's happened to me. I've gotten more release, and I've gotten more peace of mind and serenity than I've ever had. And I've got to attribute it to following directions and going back and continuously working on this. I said I liken it to operating an automobile. I've got to put gas in that car every few days, got to put air in the tires, check the batteries and those kind of things. But every now and then I've got to have a major overhaul to that job, to that car. Every now and then in my life, I've got to go back to the master mechanic and get a major overhauling on old Franklin. And that's what I do going back through these steps, is a major overhauling. Sought through talking and listening to God. I've been retired for over 2 years, and I've learned more about meditation in the last 20-something months than I've learned in all the rest of my life put together. I have some physical problems, and I spend a lot of time in a recliner. And I lean back there in that recliner, be reading the big book, fold it up and get to thinking about what's happened to old Franklin, what's happened to Tom, what's happened to many of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous that I know. And realizing that no human power could have done this. And I know where it came from. And I used to say I was scared. Scared is not the right word. I'm awed at the power. There's more power in this deal than you and I will ever be able to see. And I think if we could see the whole power here, it'd scare us to death. It's so big. No, I don't understand God, but I know God is. And if I could understand God, I'd be as big as God is. And as I said earlier, my understanding of God changes from day to day, as hopefully I make some progress in this program by applying the steps. I have come to believe, and David also carried a dictionary with him, and he made me look up words, and he made me look up believe. And one of the definitions is to rely. So I have come to rely on the forgiveness of God for yesterday, the grace of God for tomorrow. And that only leaves me today. And God is not going to put any more on me today than God and I can handle. And I know that. And I know I'm going to have difficulties. But I know that's the way I'm going to grow. And every time I come out of one of these situations, I grow a little bit more. And I think that's the way God intends for it to be. I'm not where I want to be, and I'm not where hopefully I will be. But I think I'm on the right road. And I know I can get there because I'll never run out of God. I'll never run out of God. And that's a comforting thing. A real comforting thing. So sought through prayer and meditation. As I say, I don't understand God. But I think one of the greatest things I've gotten besides this recognition of this power and the gratitude that I've gotten is that God is. The big book tells us that God is or God is not. And I can stand up here without any fear of contradiction and tell you that God is, because God has worked in my life, and God has worked in the lives of many, many, many members of Alcoholics Anonymous that I know on a real close personal basis. So having had a personality change as a result of the first 11 steps, I try to tote this message. Tote what message? People get mixed up on what the message is. The 12th step tells us what the message is. The message is purely and simply the message of a spiritual awakening as a result of the first 11 steps. It's the only message I have to carry. It's the only message any person in Alcoholics Anonymous has to carry. There's a boy down at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, that says it's better than anybody I've ever heard. And I'm going to quit giving him credit for it for long. If I tell it one more time, it's going to be mine. But he makes it real simple about carrying a message. He said, years ago, Paul Revere rode through the country carrying a simple message. The British are coming. The British are coming. Said he never got on off his horse, and he never looked back. Every picture you see, he's riding that horse, just hollering, the British are coming. He didn't stop and get on and tell them, now, if I were you, I'd do this about your marital life. If I were you, I'd do this about your financial life. And such as this, he just kept on riding that horse, hollering, the British are coming. And the message took care of itself. When he told them the British was coming, they knew to haul ass. So I've got a simple message to carry and to practice these principles in all my life. Due to time, I'll only mention one principle, and that's the ultimate. That's the apex of all religions, of what all men of the cloth are trying to teach us, is love. To practice love in all of my affairs. I've been around you people long enough to see and experience the miraculous healing power of love. And I just pray to my God of my understanding tonight that I am becoming addicted to love rather than being addicted to alcohol. I always like to close with my football story, which is mine, which I think sums up this deal. I like to think that tonight, December the 13th, 1979, at your Christmas party and the celebration of your founding and of the birthday, that the God of my understanding is saying unto me, Franklin, I'm getting up a football team, and I'm going to make you the quarterback. And I'm going to give you 3 men in the backfield that you lost during your active alcoholism. And I'm going to give them back to you in the reverse order in which you lost them. I'm going to give you hope, faith, and charity. And in the line, I'm going to give you 7 powerful men that you were introduced to in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you will use these 7 men, they'll block out resentment, self-pity, intolerance, impatience, all the stumbling blocks that have caused you trouble for the first 45 years of your life. At the 2 ends, I'm going to give you honesty and humility. At the 2 tackles, I'm going to give you patience and tolerance. At the 2 guards, I'm going to give you unselfishness and gratitude. And at the center, I'm going to give you willingness. Now, it'll be necessary that you use willingness on every play. Now, this game is going to last a lifetime. There'll be no timeouts. So I'm going to have to give you some ground rules. And the ground rules are the 10 Commandments. The first 4 of these commandments have to do with your relationship to your manager God. And the last 6 of these have to do with your relationship with your teammates. Now, the ball is your eternal soul, and the goalpost are the gates of heaven. Now get in there and play ball. Ladies and gentlemen, I need each and every one of you in my search for truth in this game of life. And if you don't believe this program will work, just keep it simple and follow directions. And if you don't believe that God will help you, just ask Him. Thank you. I love you, and God bless you.